Hi, this is Chris Potter. I'd like to thank Sir James and Lady Jean for providing this opportunity for me to share some performance tips about low flutes with you. My first topic is balancing the instrument. So if you have a curved head joint alto, what we want to do is to have it balance in our hands. And the test is to put your fingers on a D and lift all your fingers away and everything remains stable. The instrument is stable. I don't have any thumb touching on my left hand. So the trick is, or the secret, is to have the curve rotated in just slightly so that it's leaning against your chin. If you have it rolled too far out, you don't have any front back balance. If you have it rolled in too far, it's just going to fall on you. So you find that spot where it's just gently leaning against your chin. Again, put your finger on D and lift your fingers away, and that's the test to see if you've got it balanced or not. Now, if you happen to have a straight head alto, of course it's going to be that much longer. Your right hand's going to be out there that much farther. The challenge is finding that balance between holding up the instrument and keeping it from rolling backwards on you. And that's sort of a tricky thing to find for that right hand thumb. Most people end up having to hold onto it with their right index finger to keep it from rolling, but that sort of slows down your hand. Since it's so long, I recommend that people who are 5'6" or shorter, like myself, get a curved head joint alto. But you have a straight head, that's what you got. Many people play and they have the flute angled down like this, and it makes it less difficult for them to access the keys down there. But it does sort of put a little strain on your neck over here, so that's an issue. Another option that is available is an item made by a company. Their website is Mystic Media, and that's spelled M-I-S-T-I-C-M-E-D-I-A, mysticmedia.com, and they have developed, invented, whatever, a thumb support, a right-hand thumb support for alto flute, and it's got a little shelf back here. I know it's sort of hard to see. It's got a little shelf back here that your thumb sits on, and this goes on the body of the flute. And the important thing about this is that there's an adjusting screw, because what we have found is that there is no standardized bore size, in other words, body size, for an alto or a bass. So there isn't just a one-size-fits-all thumb support. So you had to have one that adjusted. This is called, again, I don't know why they call it the Cobra. They call it the Cobra. But anyway, that's made by Mystic Media. If you have a bass, it's going to be the same issue with balance. And again, basses are all designed differently, and you have to figure out what's going to work for you. What we want, ultimately, if we can all possibly get to it, is to play that D, lift all your fingers away, and it just stays there balanced in your hand. Many basses come with what's called a thumb crutch, which is this extra support right here, which is supposed to take up that problem of trying to balance the flute. Personally, I find those thumb crutches uncomfortable, but our goal is to not have to hold on to the instrument because the fingers have to be free to move around. There's some other stability issues when you have such a large instrument. If you get the slightest bit sweaty, things start moving around on you. So you may have noticed that I've got a little white patch right there. This is called a hand positioner. Here's what it looks like. This item is found in the performance aids section at retail stores, a hand positioner. And it's just a little adhesive patch. It's very smooth, but it really does a good job keeping you from slipping right there. And these do wear out after a while, and you'll have to replace them. And you can just clean off where it was with some alcohol. It's really not a problem. But I found that to be really helpful. Also on my bass, I use something called a flute gel. Comes in a package, looks like this. Flute gel, you get 2 of them in a package. And it's on the back of my instrument right here. It's gray, I don't know if you can see it, but it's actually a little cushion. So where all the weight of that bass is on your right hand thumb, you now have a little bit of a cushioning action going on, which makes your right hand feel much better, puts less strain on your hand. Another item that I use a lot is called a lip plate patch. Lip plate patch. This was actually designed for a C flute, but it works perfectly fine on altos or basses, and it just fits right around the curve of the head joint, the embouchure plate right here. And it takes 15-20 minutes for your lip to get used to what that feels like. But if you're going into a situation in which you know you're going to be sweating, I'm telling you, it works wonders at making the flute feel more stable in your hands. So now the next topic is tuning. Actually, might as well just start with the bass here. So on bass, clearly we're going to be playing an A, because the flute choirs are all playing an A, orchestra is playing an A, we're going to play an A. The question is, which octave A are you going to tune? And you need to look at the music that you're going to be playing. And most of the time we are on bass, in the middle of the staff and down. So you would definitely want to tune to the A in the staff. It would be more representative of the notes that you're going to play. Okay, on alto, we know it's a challenge. The alto is built in the key of G. So when the flute choir is playing an A, we have to play a D to match them. Well, D is not a great note for altos to tune to. Mine happens to be on the sharp side. You have to find out where yours is in relationship to your A. So if your D, like mine, happens to be sharp and you don't know that, you're probably going to pull out more than you really need to, and you're going to end up being a little bit on the flat side. So you need to find out on your instrument, is your D well in tune, or is it a little bit sharp? Maybe it's a little bit flat, whatever it is. But when you go to flute choir, you need to tune your A before everybody else gets there. And then when they're all playing your A and you have to play your D, you'll know in which way you need to compensate to be in tune with them. When I'm playing with piano, which I do quite a bit, I do use my fingered A, and the pianist would then have to play an E. No big deal. When I'm adjusting for intonation and I have a curved head joint instrument, we have three options. With a straight head, there's only one option. Either you're pulling the head joint out or you're pushing it in. So we have three possible combinations. One is I'm going to pull out where the head joint goes into the curve. Another option is to pull out where the curve goes into the body. And a third option would be to do half and half. Half of it here, half of it there. So many people had asked me this question, so I figured I'd better find out the answer. So I did some experimenting. I worked a lot with my tuner. I tried the three different positions. And what I found, at least for my two instruments, is that the best thing to do is to do all of your pulling out where the head joint goes into the curve. If you still need to pull out more, because at some point that is just too far and it just falls out, if you still need to pull out more, then you're going to make an adjustment over here. What I found was that even if I did 50-50, that the instrument tended to go sharper sooner. So I'm talking the G just above the staff. That got sharper sooner than when I pulled out everything right here. Same thing goes for the bass. This head joint is plenty long enough. You don't have to worry about it falling out if you're pulling this out. But the same rule applies. If you really feel like you have to pull out more over here, that this is just going to fall out, then I guess you're going to do that. But usually there's plenty of room on the bass head joint. Next topic is about adjusting the foot joint. So when you're playing, you want to have the foot joint keys set up the best possible way for your hand. You will notice when you go try altos and basses is that they all have different layouts of the keys, and that's very typical. Unlike C flute, where everything is pretty standardized, on alto and bass you could find the little key things just about anywhere, and you have to go try them for yourself and find out what works for your hand. So what you want to do is feel free to experiment with where this foot joint is going to go. So again, I'm giving you permission, experiment with it, find out where that's going to work for you. So the little test is you put your finger on the E flat key and you should be able to slide it down easily without lots of twisting, and the finger is going to go right onto the C roller. And the reason I pick out the C roller is that it's much harder to find than the C sharp key. And we play lots of C's. So set it up so that your little finger, when it shifts down, goes right onto the C roller. When you play C sharp, train your little finger to play that C sharp with that first knuckle, so that all you have to do is flex the tip of your little finger to get down to the C. You don't want to have to be doing this to go from C to C sharp to C. Okay, just flexing the tip of your little finger. This is especially important on bass. The keys are that much bigger. The poor little finger has to do all this work. My particular bass has a low B on it, but again, I'm training it. I've got it in the right position that it floats right onto that C roller. Now, there are lots of evil pieces, evil, where they have C to E flat. We have to go back and forth between C and E flat. So the solution for that, which is again a problem for everybody, you get a little bit of oil on your little finger from behind your ear, and then you just slide from that E flat to the C. It's so much easier if you just use a little bit of oil from your ear. Okay, let's talk about embouchure adjustments. Yes, of course, they're slightly different between the different flutes. For alto flute, it's definitely a little bit softer. For bass flute, it's obviously softer, much more relaxed, soft corners. You really want to try to soften your mouth a little bit more. If you keep more of a C flute embouchure, which is certainly still possible, you tend to get an edgier, brighter sound, and the notes tend to crack more. So we try to avoid that. Again, if you want that bright, edgy sound, you can have that bright, edgy sound, but we don't want that to be the only sound. We want something that's warmer and richer, and that means that you've got to soften a little bit. Related to embouchure adjustments, the octaves on bass and on contrabass tend to be much more sensitive, much more difficult to find than they are on C flute and alto. You have to spend more time trying to figure out exactly what that right combination of movements is in order for you to get that note. So you'd want to practice lots of octave slurs. You know, start on the F down there, bottom space, go up one octave, and try not to play the top note any louder. Just, again, trying to become very aware, where is the point at which that higher note speaks, and I need to be able to find that whenever I want it. A next topic, the response of two particular notes is especially challenging on bass, also on alto, and that's the E on the top space and the F just above it. And they just tend to crack easily, either up or down, and it's hard to find just the right spot, but of course we do need to find it. In situations in which I have to play a very short E, or I have to play a bunch of repeated tongued E's, what I found is that I just need to add the trill key underneath my fourth finger to that E fingering, and that note just pops right out. Nice and short, doesn't crack, sounds great. Also works for F. On E, when you use that fingering, sometimes it's a little bit too sharp, so you just lift off your E flat key and you'll be right in tune. I never used as many alternate fingerings as when I started playing low flutes, but that's just the way it is. Tonguing, next topic, tonguing. On C flute, we don't worry too much about exactly what the consonant is. We can use a T or a D or an L or whatever we want. On bass and alto and contrabass, what I found is that the T doesn't work very well. It's too explosive. It focuses the air in a little bit too narrow a stream. The notes tend to crack more. So the D consonant works much better. So when you're practicing, try to be aware of how your tongue is moving. If you think of the difference between a D and a T, you will realize what's going on with your tongue and how the T tends to focus the air in a narrower stream. Just saying, tends to make the notes crack more. If you have a bunch of fast tongued notes, play them as long as possible. If you think about how long that air column is that you're trying to interrupt, if you have a really short burst of air, not much is going to come out, and especially when you're going fast. Think of playing those notes as long as possible. Keep that air powerful. I want to pass on a piece of information that I learned from Jeffrey Gilbert, who was a brilliant teacher. He sort of synthesized this in a very excellent way, and that is forte air, piano tongue, right? The tongue cannot make sound. It's the air that makes the sound. Keep the tongue relaxed so that it can move, but not so hard that it interferes with things. The third octave is our next topic, my next topic. Yes, the sound is thinner, it's sharper, and the curved head instruments are definitely sharper than a straight tube alto. And the reason for that is that there needs to be, in order for the third octave to be better in tune, there needs to be a continuous taper from the sealed up end, the crown end of the head joint, to the spot where the head joint goes into the body. It needs to be a continuous taper. If you look at your straight head alto or your C flute, you will notice that that's exactly what it does. They don't know how to make that continuous taper through the curve, which is why the third octave is a little bit sharper. But that doesn't mean that we just give up on it. It just means that we have to find some embouchure adjustments. We have to find some alternate fingerings. So it's not that big of a deal. I play up there all the time. You probably, in a flute choir, you're not going to be playing up there that often. But a D, for example, is not unusual on an alto flute to play a D. There are a couple of fingerings that I use for that D up there. The easiest one is just lift off your E flat key. This is the D above the staff. Just lift off your E flat key. Or if it's still really sharp, overblow a G. And that sometimes that takes care of the problem. This, my next topic is about bass flute supports, some of which work for a straight tube alto. If you're finding you really need help holding up your alto, some of these might work for you. So the first one is called the bass flute lap crutch. This is what it looks like. This curved part here sits on your leg, and the cradle right here is where your instrument sits. And so you're playing and you're holding it up right there. It doesn't, you can't really move around too much, a little bit. And it's very lightweight, it's very compact. It's also adjustable, it will go up and down. One of the challenges with this particular thing, well, there's two challenges. One is that when you want to take your flute down, you have to immediately grab this, or else it's going to fall and land on your neighbor, and they're not going to be very happy. And the other problem being that it's sometimes hard to get a hold of them. They only come over in shipments from China, and once that lot is sold out, a waiting list begins to build for more of them. An option that I've used at home is to get a second black stand. You flip it up so that the flat part there, usually the music sits there, is on the top. I put a cloth over the top of that, and then I can rest the end of my flute on top of that, and then I won't scratch it. I can move it around a little bit. Clearly I can move this stand up or down depending on what height I want. So that's a good option for at home. Not such a good option for rehearsals, because who wants to lug yet another music stand around? And it also doesn't look so fabulous at a performance, but you know, if you have to do it, that's what you're going to do. You can also get one of those wire music stands that we all had to get in 5th grade when we started in band. You can have one of those. They're not as heavy or bulky as one of these. And again, you put a cloth in one of the little connections. You can rest the end of your flute on that. Again, not so attractive during a performance, but for rehearsals, which is when most of our problems happen, that works perfectly fine. There's another item. Again, this is a problem for lots of people. It's called the bass boost, and it's a series of telescoping tubes. It's very lightweight, but still a little bit on the bulky side. Telescoping tubes, you can play it sitting down, or it'll go to standing up. It's mounted on a base. It has a swivel at the bottom, so you can move around, and it actually looks quite nice. This would be something that I wouldn't hesitate to use in a performance if I needed to. So that's yet another option. There is an item that about 2 years ago came on the market called a bass flute support that you can only use while you're sitting. And it's similar to the lap crutch, except that it has a clamp that you tighten onto the flute itself. And it has a little adjustable rod with a little foot on it, rubber foot, that you put either on your leg or on your legs, on the chair between your legs, and it will hold the flute up for you. When you pick the flute up, it's going to be on the flute. So you have to remember that that's going to be dangling there. But that's yet another option, much more compact and lightweight than the bass boost, but you may or may not like it. My particular instrument comes with its own support rod. It has this wonderful little swivel joint right here, which attaches to a screw that's built into the instrument. It just attaches here, and this end sits on the chair between my legs, and it holds it, and it swivels, and it moves, and it's wonderful, but it only comes with this particular brand. There's another excellent brand of bass flute that comes with a support. It's a little shorter stick that sits in like a little cup on a string around your neck. And they still need to work on that, but the instrument itself is actually excellent. Now I'm going to talk about breathing. We use a lot of air when we play the low flutes. And if your breathing isn't well organized, you're going to have trouble. You're going to be running out of air all the time, and it is just not particularly comfortable. So you need to really make sure that your whole breathing apparatus is working well. On C flute, you need to be able to hold a note for at least 35 seconds, a soft note, at least 35 seconds. On alto, you should be able to go 30. On bass, 25. If you can't reach those markers, you need to go back and rethink how you are taking air into your body and then how efficiently you are using it. For the inhale portion, which is where most people fall, is like yawning or sighing. And if you think about what happens when you're doing those things, your torso expands and then it's held there, and gravity is all you need to want to push the air out, that and the resistance in your lips. So you've got to consider how breathing affects everything you play. If you are running out of air a lot, it's hard to think well. It's hard to play interesting phrases if you're always running out of air. So work on your air supply. Very important for low flutes. So let's say I really would like my tone to be better. Wouldn't we all like our tone to be better? Of course we would. It's something that takes constant maintenance and constant revisiting. And one of my favorite ones to use is Sir James' Daily Warm-Up. I actually start on the third line, which is a G, and I work my way down, and then I do the top line an octave lower. And I really enjoy that, and I make my students play it as well. It's all about learning how to connect the notes together and how to make a phrase and how to sustain those notes and make it very beautiful. De la Sonorité also has some great exercises. I'm sure many of you have that book. We would work on, of course, the lower end of the spectrum. I also have a bunch of exercises in my method books. I have an alto and a bass method book that have many exercises in it besides just the tone ones, which are the first ones in the book. This is published by a subsidiary of Amazon, and it's available worldwide. You want to start from a good note, let's say B, in the middle of the staff, and work your way down, just a few notes at a time, really trying to pay attention to what it sounds like, what it feels like, how you're breathing, how much air noise you've got. Can I make that any better? Can I find a better spot? It takes a lot of concentrated thought to improve your tone. I find that I have to close my eyes when I do it so that I think more about my hearing and evaluating what I'm hearing. Another topic that low flutes have to deal with is that low turnaround. Like in the Moïse scale, where he goes all the way up to the B flat or B natural and comes all the way down to the C or the C sharp, we need to focus on that low turnaround because we're down there a lot. So you need to make up exercises for yourself that work on that low turnaround because we're down there. We've got to figure out how to do it well. I have a scale pattern that I developed specifically for low flutes in my method books that emphasize that low turnaround. Let's say you need to switch between different size flutes. I think that happens to a lot of us. In flute choir, sometimes you're on C flute, sometimes you're on bass, sometimes, oh heavens, you're on piccolo, whatever, and you need to switch between instruments. Practice the pieces in the order in which they're going to be in the concert. Find that out from the conductor, because it really helps if you know how you're going to have to adjust for that next piece. My hardest switch is from bass to C flute. I hardly ever play piccolo. From bass to C flute, because the C flute feels like a toy after I've been playing the bass flute. It just feels so tiny in my hands. So you have to practice those changes, just like anything else. You have to practice those changes. If you have control over your own program, you can pick which pieces come when. And I have found that for myself, I do not put a fast C flute piece right after a bass piece, because it takes a little bit too much adjustment. I will put something else in there instead. But it's something we have to consider. The embouchure has to make an adjustment. You have to have the gears up here developed enough so that you know, what do I have to change to go from this instrument to that instrument. Learning alternate fingerings. More important on low flutes than you realize, and just for one reason alone, like on contrabass, going from C to D, middle of the staff, there are so many keys moving. The sound of the metal clacking is almost louder than the sound of the instrument itself. So to minimize how many keys move is one of the reasons that we use alternate fingerings. So from C to D, just move your left hand fingers, leave your right hand fingers alone. It also speeds things up a lot, which is sometimes extremely useful. So don't be afraid to start exploring alternate fingerings, but just pick one to start with. Get really good at that one, then put in another one. I use them all the time. I'm used to it. I know which ones I've chosen for certain situations. I'm playing up in the third octave a lot. I know what the fingerings are. I have my own little shorthand of the fingerings that I'm going to use. But don't be afraid to use alternate fingerings. Let's say you are thinking about you'd like to be in an orchestra. There are 3 big orchestral excerpts for alto flute. They are Daffodils and Cloy, The Rite of Spring, and Holst the Planets. So if you are thinking you'd like to get into an orchestra, sometimes they're looking for somebody who will come and audition to be able to play the alto flute part. So one book has many orchestral excerpts. This is the Alto Flute Practice Book, published by Novello. It has a bunch of orchestral excerpts. It does not have the Daffodils and Cloy because the publisher refused to give them permission to print the alto flute part in his book. But the Daffodils and Cloy is actually in the public domain, and you can print a score. It's not the greatest score, but you can print the score, or you find a friend who might have it, or maybe you're friends with the orchestra librarian, something. Find a way to get a hold of that one, because that one I think is the most often programmed, is Daffodils and Cloy. If you want more information about anything low flutes, there is a Low Flutes Facebook group, about 2,500 people from all over the world. Great solutions to problems, great answers to things. So don't be afraid to, if you're on Facebook, ask to join. I happen to be in charge, so ask to join. If you're looking for repertoire, I would suggest that you go to the website lowflutesfestival.org and look for suggested repertoire. There's actually quite a bit of music, especially for alto. There have been international alto competitions, quite well developed now. There are lots of pieces that are just hard to find. Stores don't necessarily stock them. You have to nudge them to get them to get pieces for you. In that list, there are solo pieces, there are duets, there's trios, quartets, quintets, things with flute choir, with solo low flutes, all sorts of options. It has the publisher, it has the composer, and it has how difficult the piece is. So that could be a big help for you. If you need to contact me or like to contact me further, you can go to my website, which is chrispotterflute.com. And among other things on my website is a listing of low flutes repair people that have been recommended by people who've had their instruments repaired by these repair people. And it's in many countries, not just the US. And if you like to contact me, you have further questions, just email me at chris@chrispotterflute.com. Thank you very much for listening.